Hey everybody, it's Jason from the Texas Gun Vault, and once again I'm coming to you with another range report, or really a range report and product review, because this is going to be another video dedicated to just a silencer. And the suppressor that we will be taking to the range and trying out is the Huxwrx RAD 9. Now this is a 9mm modular suppressor, and by modular it means that we can change the overall length. However, I am only going to review this in its full configuration. And that is because if we do take off the end portion, which adds 3 or 4 baffles, we get a suppressor that is this long. And that is exactly the same as the Huxwrx Cache 9, which I recently reviewed. So if you want to know how this suppressor would work without the end baffles, you can go watch that review, and I will put a link in the description below. But pretty much it's exactly the same design internally. It has the same baffle system. This one is just a little bit longer. So I really want to see what the big difference is with the suppressor in its full length configuration. And because this is a Huxwrx suppressor, as I mentioned, this is a low resistance or flow through can, and they're using their baffle technology to hopefully reduce the amount of gas that is coming back into the shooter's face. Some people think this is all hocus pocus and it doesn't work, but I can tell you from reviewing their rifle suppressors, I am very impressed with the results. When it came to the Cache 9, it had a little bit more blowback than I was expecting, but that's because these have to use a more traditional baffle system. And when I take this apart, I'll show you how that system works. Now, before we get to the range and talk about all the specs of this suppressor, I have to remind you that I do these reviews a little bit different than many other people online, in that the only thing people seem to care about when it comes to suppressors is the overall decibel reduction. But I argue that almost every modern suppressor is hearing safe. But there are other metrics that we on the civilian side of things should take into consideration that in some ways are more important. Things like tone. Is the tone of this suppressor pleasant? Because you can have a hearing safe suppressor that really reduces the decibels a lot but has a very high pitch. It can still make your ears ring. So I want to see what the overall tone of this suppressor is. I really want to know, does this flow through system work in its full length configuration? How does this can handle heat? Is it heat resilience? And when you shoot rounds through it, does it change the point of impact or the ballistics in any way? And I think these are very important things to measure. Some of these things I can measure in a very quantifiable way, and some things I'm just going to have to share with you my opinion and my experience. So the first thing I want to do is adjust the camera, give you some close-ups of the suppressor. Let's take it apart, let's see what's inside, and then we'll take it to the range and see how it performs. So let's get some close-ups of this suppressor and talk about its specs. Its overall length is 7.7 inches. It has a diameter of 1.38 inches. Its weight is 9.1 ounces. It is made of stainless steel, titanium, and aluminum. And from what I can tell, the tube is made of titanium, the mount and the baffles are stainless steel, and the end cap is aluminum. And titanium is my favorite suppressor material. It is lightweight, it resists corrosion, and it is heat resilient. This suppressor is rated for 9mm, 22 long rifle, 17 HMR, 5.7x28, 300 blackout subsonic, and 350 legend. It is also full auto rated. So Huxwrx has some faith that this design is durable and can take full auto fire. So if you're only going to run this semi-auto, you should be good to go. So let's take this apart and see what it looks like inside and this low resistance baffle design. So we're going to start with the mount first, and we're going to use the tool that is supplied by Huxwrx in the box, and we can loosen the mount. We can take this off, and right now I have a standard piston in it because I'm running it on an FN 509 Tactical. So we can remove the whole booster system. Here is the mount, the spring, and the piston. And now we can go to the other end of the suppressor. We can take off the end cap. We'll use our tool again. And once you loosen this up, you should be able to break the suppressor in half. And we can divide it into its two parts. Let's take a look at the end portion first. And once we remove the end cap, we can get to the end baffle, which does not have those spiral cuts in it. Now, I should say I have cleaned this suppressor before this review, and if you're curious how to clean it or how well the suppressor cleans up, go take a look at my Huxwrx Cache 9K review. So here we have our end baffle. We have a little baffle at the end. You can see this is just smooth on the outside. And then here are the baffles that have those little spiral cuts in them, and that's supposed to allow the gas to move forward in the suppressor. And each portion of the suppressor does have a blast baffle, I guess we would call this, or a blast chamber, and each one of these comes apart for easy cleaning. And because this is made of stainless steel, you can put it into a sonic cleaner, and then we can get the other portion of the baffle stack out. And it pretty much looks like the baffles at the end. It just has an extra baffle in it because that portion of the suppressor is a little bit longer. And that is the complete suppressor taken apart. And there's that titanium tube. It's really light. And the serialized part of this suppressor is on the larger portion. So in case anything happens to one of the baffles, Huxwrx can replace those. Or if anything happens to the end, this can be replaced as well very easily. So let's go ahead and put this back together. We'll start with the piston. Put the spring on the piston and the mount. Put it into the rear portion of the suppressor, and then we can screw that on, and you just have to make it snug with the tool. And now let's put the main portion of the suppressor back together. We have our blast chamber, and you want to make sure the more narrow end is going to go towards the booster or the piston. And then you can take the baffles and click them together. These do have some clips in them, and everybody says if you can get those aligned, you'll get a little bit better suppression, but you don't have to do it. It's just one of those things that some people claim. I don't really have any real empirical data on that, and I've never seen anybody actually look into it. That's just what people say online. And then we can put that portion of the baffle stack in there. Now, if you just wanted to run this in its short configuration, once this is in the main body of the suppressor, you can take the end cap and you can screw it on like this. And essentially, this would be the Cache 9K or the RAD 9 in its short configuration. But that's not the way we're going to run it today. So let's take that end cap back off. And now let's build the end portion of this suppressor. So we'll take our blast chamber and we'll put these baffles together. We can try to line up those clips to the best of our ability here. Make sure you put in the little end baffle, and then you can slide it in the end portion. This can be a little bit tricky, as you can see. And there we go. And you can now stack it onto the main portion of the suppressor if you want to get that started. And then we can take the end cap and screw that on, and then screw it all together. And all those baffles, for the most part, should be aligned. Put on that end cap. And then, of course, use the tool and tighten it down. And there you go. That is how you would take apart or change its configuration of the Huxwrx RAD 9. So that's what this suppressor is all about. So now let's take this to the range and see how it performs. And as I said, we're going to use an FN 509 as our host weapon. So for our first test, I just want to see what the overall tone of this suppressor is. So I'm going to shoot this unsuppressed and suppressed and just get my initial thoughts and opinions and make sure the suppressor is working well. So let's go to the range and see what I discover. And I can definitely tell you, I learned a lot about this suppressor from those first shots. But before I share that with you, there are two people that I want to give a huge shout out to. First is the owner of this suppressor, who not only donates his time to help me go to the range with these, but also filled out all of the paperwork so I can borrow them for this review. It really means a lot because he goes above and beyond to help the Texas Gun Vault. He's a local fan and subscriber named Jack. So Jack, thank you so much. And I also want to thank my primary sponsor for all of my range reports because, as you know, I'm putting a lot of rounds down range for all of these reviews, and he provides the ammunition and makes them financially feasible for me. His name is Mark, and he's the owner of a grip company called Huxwrx. And Huxwrx is a custom grip company making a wide variety of grips for a wide variety of firearms out of a wide variety of exotic woods and materials. And I always am showing you some of his best work in these ads. He can make grips out of exotic woods, make his own laminate woods, put on custom logos, custom engravings, put on exotic materials like snakeskin and alligator skin to make them unique and one of a kind. Pretty much anything you can imagine he can make. So I'm going to put a link to his website in the comment section below, as well as a coupon code for 10% off your first order. Please go over there, check out everything he has to offer, and when you place your order for a set of custom grips, please tell Mark the Texas Gun Vault sent you. So now let's talk about the overall tone of this suppressor. Now, when I did review the Huxwrx Cash 9K, I did mention it had a tone that was more in the mid-range. However, with these extra baffles, it adds a lot of volume and the pitch of the suppressor is much lower. It's even quieter, but with that lower pitch, it really sounds amazing. I'm very impressed with that. But now let's talk about something I was not expecting to see at this distance. And this suppressor seems to have a pretty darn big point of impact shift. Now, we will test this more thoroughly later, but even with just my first shots, it was very noticeable. When I reviewed the Cash 9K, I did not experience this. So maybe these extra baffles are changing the ballistics in some way. But now the next test I want to do is see if this flow-through technology is working. So we're going to go back to the range. I'm going to shoot a bunch of rounds through this in pretty quick succession, and I'm going to tell you my experience of what I'm feeling from behind the gun. Is this a low resistance suppressor, or are we getting a lot of gas back in the face? So let's go back to the range and see if this flow-through technology is working. Now this is something that is very difficult to test and capture on camera, so you just have to take my word for it. But when it comes to the results of this test, it was surprising as compared to the other Huxwrx suppressors I have recently reviewed. Those seem to work pretty well. However, this one seems to have a lot of resistance. I showed you that this suppressor does have those spirals in the baffles, which seem to work in the short configuration, but at the end of the baffle in this first part of the suppressor, it doesn't, and I was curious if that was going to trap the gas or add the resistance. I can tell you from being behind the trigger of this gun, I'm getting a lot of gas back in the face, and I'm even feeling some of the unburnt powder hitting my face. It kind of feels like a regular suppressor, so I feel like they're trying to market this with that flow-through technology, but because it uses a very traditional baffle system and it has so many baffles, it's not really working as effective as some of their other designs, which I definitely do believe work. So now the next thing I want to test through this suppressor is some dedicated subsonic ammunition. Now I've been using 115 grain up until this point, so we're going to go back to the range and use 147 grain. So this suppressor already has a great tone to it. It's definitely hearing safe, but hopefully with subsonic ammunition, it's going to sound even better. And with subsonic ammunition, this suppressor sounds pretty darn amazing. It was already sounding great before, but with this ammunition, it almost is Hollywood quiet. The suppressor is very large and has a large volume, and so it was doing great with 115 grain, but with 147, it's pretty amazing. But this size really is a big trade-off. A lot of people are going to want a shorter suppressor, so maybe running this in that K configuration or as a Cash 9K might be the better way to go. I really liked that suppressor. But with this extra weight, I don't know if it's worth it with this extra resistance. But let's also talk about the point of impact shift. Using subsonic ammunition, this threw those shots way off. And I know some people are going to say, Jason, you must be a terrible shot. But once again, I'm going to ask you to go check out my review where I do this exact test with the Cash 9K, and I do not experience that big shift in the point of impact. But now I want to go back to the range and test this shift a little bit more. We're going to move back to 115 grain and we're going to set up the target at 25 yards. And once again, I will shoot this unsuppressed and suppressed. And I'm going to shoot them side by side and try to take as much of the human element out of the equation as possible because I'm going to shoot it from the bench. So let's go back to the range and see if we can get any more data on this point of impact shift. And it looks like I'm getting a very consistent result when it comes to this test, especially when you look at what happened with my first shots through it and even when I tested subsonic ammunition through it. And that is, most of the rounds that are going through the suppressor are hitting the target low and to the right. And typically when I don't shoot a gun well, I'm low and to the left. But because this does not matter about the target's distance or even the ammunition that I'm using, it means that it is something consistent about the design of this suppressor. I believe it has something to do with the transition from the main body of the suppressor to the end part. And I think it has to do because the baffle design is changed. You have that end baffle of the primary portion of the suppressor that doesn't have that flow-through technology going into the blast chamber of the end. I don't know. I think that transition is causing something to happen ballistically and changing the point of impact quite dramatically. And I also think that's where the gas might be getting caught up and why I'm feeling so much more resistance with this suppressor than I did with the Cash 9K. I also was not experiencing this point of impact shift when I was shooting it essentially as the shortened version of the suppressor when it was the Cash 9K. So there's something about this in baffle section that's changing this gun's point of impact. But now I want to go back to the range and I want to see what the suppressor is doing when it comes to changing the velocities and the ballistics of these projectiles. So I'm going to get out the Garmin Zero chronograph. We're going to go back to the range, shoot a few shots through this unsuppressed and suppressed, and compare the data. .1207, 1196, 1200, 1192, 1192. $11.87, $12.27, $11.77, $11.90, $11.77. And the result that I'm getting here was very surprising because pretty much every time I attach a suppressor to a weapon, the overall ballistics become much more consistent. However, this gun shot very well unsuppressed. The standard deviation and the spread was very small. But when I attached the suppressor, it quadrupled, and that tells me that this is changing the velocities and the ballistics of these projectiles a lot more than maybe you would hope it would. Once again, I did not experience these issues when it was just the Cash 9K. I think it has something to do with the modular design. It's the only thing that's different. So I wanted to report to you about that. I know some people are going to say that the extension is definitely worth it because you get more suppression, but I am personally discovering that when it comes to the point of impact and the overall ballistics, this gun is going to run better unsuppressed or in its short configuration. So the last test I want to do is check its heat resiliency. Once again, I'm going to go back to the range and put a mag through this and pretty much just do a mag dump. I want to see how hot I can get this suppressor. Now, I have mentioned in recent reviews that titanium is my favorite material for suppressors to be made out of. It typically dissipates the heat quite quick, and it also doesn't get as hot. So let's go back to the range, see how hot I can get this suppressor and how much it cools after 5 minutes. And the results of this test are exactly what I would expect them to be. The suppressor does get pretty hot, but it dissipates that heat pretty quickly, and it's because of that titanium construction. I absolutely love titanium. I know many companies want to make their suppressors completely out of stainless steel because it's very durable and also easy to manufacture them with. However, the titanium is just the better option for the heat mitigation. It's just the better material, and it's lighter. It is more expensive, but I personally think it is worth it. So what are my final thoughts on the Huxwrx RAD 9 9mm modular suppressor? Now this definitely has some pros and cons, so let's break those down. First off, this suppressor has an amazing tone. It probably has the best sound of any 9mm suppressor I have reviewed. I love the fact it is modular, so you can run it in a short configuration and the full-length configuration, and I love the fact it is made out of titanium, or portions of it are made out of titanium. I just think, once again, that is the best material to make suppressors out of. But let's talk about the cons of this suppressor. I really feel like the flow-through technology is not working as well as it should, and I think it has to do with this end portion of the suppressor. As the projectiles transition from the main body to this extension, I think the gas gets caught up right here where you have that end baffle going into the second blast chamber. And that flow-through technology is not consistent throughout the entire silencer. And then there's the elephant in the room, the big point of impact shift and the change in ballistics. That really concerns me about this. So, does the suppressor work? Does it reduce decibels? Yes, by a lot. Does it have a good sound? Yes, it really does. However, when it comes to the performance of the firearm, I really feel like you lose a lot with this suppressor. And because of that, I'm going to have to deduct quite a few points. So on my star system, how would I rate the Huxwrx RAD 9 9mm modular suppressor? I'm only going to give this 3 out of 5 stars. And it's pretty much because of the point of impact shift and the change of ballistics. But all of the other metrics, the heat resilience and the tone, are awesome. But when I shot this as the Cash 9K, I didn't have this point of impact shift. So there's something about the end portion of this suppressor that's changing things a lot. I'm curious what you guys think it might be, so tell me in the comments section below. So what do you think about this suppressor? Do you like modular suppressors? And do you like Huxwrx? Let me know, as always. And as always, thanks for watching.